You missed a spot, useless thing." The words sliced through her like a blade of ice, sharp and deliberate. Lyra felt them settle in her chest, joining the collection of wounds that never quite healed, never quite scarred over completely. Lady Seraphina stood above her, radiant in silk and smugness, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at a section of stone floor that gleamed as spotlessly as the rest. Lyra had been scrubbing this same hallway for 3 hours. Her knees ached against the cold marble, her hands were raw from the harsh soap, and her back screamed from being hunched over for so long. She knew there was no spot. There never was. But she also knew that pointing this out would only make things worse. "Of course, my lady," she whispered, dipping her brush back into the bucket of grey water. "I'll see to it immediately." Seraphina's laugh was like broken glass, all sharp edges and cruelty. "See that you do. The Alpha King arrives tomorrow for the mating ceremony, and I won't have him thinking I can't manage my own servants properly." She paused, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only Lyra could hear. "Though I suppose it hardly matters what he thinks of the help. After all, who would ever notice something like you?" The silk rustled as Seraphina swept away, her entourage of ladies-in-waiting trailing behind her like colourful birds following their queen. Their whispered laughter echoed off the stone walls, each giggle another small cut to add to Lyra's collection. Lyra remained on her knees, brush in hand, waiting for the sound of their footsteps to fade completely before she allowed herself to breathe. This was survival. This was how she had learned to endure the 18 years of her life in the Shadow Moon Pack. Make yourself small, make yourself invisible, never give them a reason to notice you more than they already do. The problem was, even invisible felt too visible sometimes. She had been born wrong, that much was clear from the very beginning. While other children in the pack manifested their wolves at 13, 14 at the latest, Lyra had waited, and waited, and waited. The ceremony of first shift came and went without so much as a stirring in her blood. No golden eyes, no lengthening canines, no surge of supernatural strength. Just Lyra, ordinary and human and utterly, completely powerless in a world where power was everything. An Omega without a wolf was like a bird without wings, the pack whispered. Worse than useless, a burden. A walking reminder that sometimes the ancient bloodlines simply ran dry. She had found her place eventually. Every pack needed servants, after all. Someone had to scrub the floors and tend the fires and prepare the meals for those who actually mattered. Someone had to be invisible so that others could shine. Lyra had become very good at being invisible. She finished the imaginary spot and sat back on her heels, surveying the hallway that gleamed like a mirror. Tomorrow the Alpha King would walk these very stones. Kieran Blackthorn, ruler of all the packs in the Northern Territories, would stride through these halls with his massive frame and his legendary presence, and she would make sure she was nowhere to be seen when he did. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Alpha King who could shift into a wolf the size of a small horse. The Alpha King whose mere presence could bring lesser wolves to their knees in submission. The Alpha King who had never taken a mate, despite centuries of political pressure, because his beast had never chosen. Until now. The mating ceremony between the Alpha King and Lady Seraphina had been negotiated for months. A political alliance that would unite the Shadow Moon Pack with the royal bloodline, bringing prosperity and protection to their territory. Seraphina was everything an Alpha Queen should be. Beautiful, powerful, born of strong bloodlines with a wolf as golden and fierce as she was. And tomorrow Lyra would watch from the servants' corners as that perfect creature became the most powerful woman in their world. The thought shouldn't have hurt. She had no claim to anything or anyone, least of all to dreams that were never meant for someone like her. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night when sleep eluded her, Lyra found herself wondering what it would feel like to be seen, really seen, to be chosen, to matter to someone the way mates mattered to each other. Foolish thoughts. Dangerous thoughts. She gathered her cleaning supplies and rose to her feet, her joints protesting after hours on the stone floor. The castle would be in chaos tonight, final preparations for tomorrow's grand ceremony. Cook would need help in the kitchens, and there would be countless last-minute tasks for the invisible hands to handle. As she walked through the corridors toward the servants' quarters, Lyra passed beneath portraits of past Alpha Queens, their painted eyes following her movement with what felt like disapproval. Each woman was a vision of supernatural beauty and power, their wolves captured in gleaming detail beside their human forms. She paused beneath the largest portrait, that of the current Luna's grandmother. The woman's silver wolf seemed almost alive in the painting, its intelligent eyes holding secrets that spoke of ancient magic and unbreakable bonds. What would it be like, she wondered, to have that kind of connection with another soul? To be someone's other half, their perfect match, their forever? "Stop it," she whispered to herself, the sound barely a breath in the empty hallway. "Stop dreaming about things that will never be yours." But as she continued down the corridor, past the grand ballroom where tomorrow's ceremony would take place, past the windows that showed the moon hanging full and bright in the sky, Lyra couldn't quite silence the tiny voice in her heart that whispered, "What if? What if there was more to her story than 18 years of scrubbing floors and being invisible? What if tomorrow changed everything?" The voice was foolish and naive and would only lead to more pain. But it was hers, the only thing in this world that belonged entirely to her, and she held it close as she disappeared into the shadows where she belonged. Tomorrow the Alpha King would claim his mate, and Lyra would remain exactly what she had always been. Nobody at all. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow her wolf would finally wake up, and when it did, it would recognize a scent that would shatter every truth she had ever been told about herself. 6 months had passed since the mating ceremony, and the Northern Territories had transformed beyond recognition. Lyra stood in the council chamber, her silver hair cascading over shoulders draped in midnight blue silk, addressing a dispute between 2 minor packs with the kind of patient wisdom that had become her signature as queen. The young wolves who brought their grievances before her no longer saw the servant girl who had once scrubbed floors. They saw their Luna, powerful and compassionate, whose very presence seemed to make impossible problems suddenly solvable. "The territory boundaries established by your grandfathers are no longer relevant," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came not from birthright alone, but from months of earning her people's respect through competent leadership. "The herds have moved north with the changing seasons, and your packs must adapt or face starvation. I propose a shared hunting ground, with seasonal rotations that benefit both families." The 2 alpha wolves who had arrived ready for war exchanged glances of grudging respect. Their Luna's solution was elegant in its simplicity, fair in its application, and showed a deep understanding of pack dynamics that surprised them every time. "As you command, Your Majesty," they said in unison, their bows sincere rather than merely ceremonial. Lyra watched them leave, their territorial dispute resolved without bloodshed or lasting resentment, and felt the warm satisfaction that came from using power to heal rather than dominate. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have believed herself capable of inspiring such respect, much less commanding it. "Another successful mediation," Kieran said, from where he stood by the windows, his voice rich with pride and something deeper. "The Northern packs haven't seen this kind of peace in generations." She turned to find him watching her with the expression that still made her heart skip beats, silver eyes warm with love and admiration that had only grown stronger with time. He was magnificent as always, but there was a relaxed contentment about him now that spoke of a man who had found his perfect complement. "It helps that they know we actually listen to them," she replied, moving to his side and automatically settling into the curve of his arm. The mate bond hummed between them, steady and warm and absolutely secure after months of deepening connection. Most of their disputes come from feeling unheard rather than actual resource conflicts. "Most of their disputes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. come from having a queen who actually cares about their well-being rather than just their taxes and military contributions. It was true. The reforms Lyra had implemented in her first months as queen had focused on the forgotten members of pack society, the young wolves struggling to find their place, the elders whose wisdom was overlooked, the families who worked hard but never seemed to prosper. She remembered too well what it felt like to be invisible, and she was determined that no one under her rule would ever feel that kind of abandonment. "Your Majesty," a soft voice interrupted from the doorway, "the afternoon petitioners are ready for your attention." Lyra turned to see Sarah, a young wolf who had been promoted from kitchen duties to royal attendant after showing remarkable organisational skills and unshakable loyalty. She was part of the new generation of palace staff, wolves who served not out of fear or tradition, but out of genuine affection for rulers who treated them like family rather than property. "Thank you, Sarah. Please ask them to wait just a moment longer." Lyra's smile was gentle, but tinged with something that made the young woman's eyes brighten with curiosity. "I have an announcement to make first." Sarah curtsied and withdrew, but her excitement was obvious. Palace staff had developed an uncanny ability to sense when their queen had news worth celebrating. An announcement? Kieran raised an eyebrow, though his own excitement was poorly concealed behind his attempt at casual interest. "What kind of announcement?" Lyra took his hands in hers, marvelling as she always did at how perfectly they fit together. 6 months of marriage had only deepened their connection, mate bond strengthening with each shared challenge and quiet moment of intimacy. "The kind that's going to change our lives forever," she said, her voice soft with wonder and joy. "The kind that ensures the Nightshade bloodline will continue for another generation." Understanding dawned in his silver eyes, followed immediately by a blaze of joy so intense it made the mate bond flare between them like captured sunlight. His hands moved to frame her face with infinite gentleness, as if she were made of spun glass and starlight. "You're certain?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Elder Morrigan confirmed it this morning," she replied, leaning into his touch. "We're going to have a child, Kieran. An heir. A future." His response was immediate and overwhelming, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the council chamber while his laughter echoed off the stone walls. When he set her down, his hands immediately moved to her still flat stomach with protective reverence. "A baby," he breathed, wonder making his voice soft. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though the answer was written across every line of his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, pulling her close for a kiss that carried 6 months of deepened love and the promise of a future neither had dared to dream possible. "I'm overwhelmed, terrified, excited, and more grateful than I thought it was possible to be." The mate bond carried his emotions to her, a cascade of joy and protective instinct and absolute devotion that made her eyes fill with tears. He would be an extraordinary father, she realised, just as he had become an extraordinary husband and king. "The pack will be thrilled," she said when they finally broke apart. "They've been dropping hints about an heir since our 3rd week of marriage." "The pack," he agreed, with a grin that was both regal and boyishly delighted, "is going to lose their collective minds with excitement. Elder Morrigan in particular is going to be insufferable with smugness." They were interrupted by a discreet cough from the doorway. Sarah had returned, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity about whatever had made her king and queen look like they were about to burst with shared secrets. "Your Majesty, the petitioners are growing restless. Shall I have them wait longer, or would you prefer to reschedule?" Lyra exchanged a glance with Kieran, seeing her own thought reflected in his silver eyes. Why wait? Why keep such wonderful news secret when sharing it would bring joy to people who had become like family? "Actually, Sarah," she said, her voice carrying the warm authority that had made her beloved rather than merely respected, "please ask all the petitioners to gather in the great hall instead of the smaller audience chamber. and send word to the pack leadership, the council members, and anyone else currently in the castle. I have an announcement that I think everyone will want to hear." Sarah's eyes went wide with excitement, but she maintained her professional composure. "At once, Your Majesty." 30 minutes later, the great hall was packed with wolves from every level of pack society. Petitioners and council members stood shoulder to shoulder with guards and servants, all united in their affection for rulers who had proven themselves through competence, compassion, and genuine care for their people's well-being. Lyra stood before them in the same spot where she had once faced trial by combat, but this time she radiated joy rather than determination. The crown of her ancestors caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, and the mate bond collar around her throat blazed with golden fire that spoke of deep contentment. "My people," she began, her voice carrying easily through the packed hall, "6 months ago you witnessed my awakening as your queen. You saw me claim my birthright, defeat those who would have destroyed us, and take my place beside your king as his partner and mate." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, faces bright with the memory of that turbulent but ultimately triumphant time. "Today I stand before you not just as your queen, but as a woman who has found happiness beyond anything she dared to dream. You have given me your loyalty, your respect, and your love. You have made me feel valued, treasured, and utterly at home in ways I never thought possible." She paused, letting her gaze move across familiar faces, seeing the pack members who had become her family in truth rather than just title. "And now," she continued, her voice soft with wonder, "King Kieran and I are blessed to share news that fills our hearts with joy. In the spring, the Nightshade bloodline will welcome its newest member. I carry the future of our pack, the next generation of our royal line." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the hall exploded with celebration that could probably be heard in the neighbouring territories. Wolves howled their joy to the rafters, voices raised in harmony that spoke of shared happiness and hope for the future. Elder Morrigan pushed through the crowd, with tears streaming down her ancient cheeks, her arms open to embrace the young woman she had helped guide from broken servant to beloved queen. "My dear child," she whispered against Lyra's ear, "your mother would be so proud." The celebration continued around them, but for a moment Lyra was transported back to that day in the tower chamber when Morrigan had first told her the truth about her heritage. From that confused, frightened girl to this confident queen, surrounded by love, the transformation still amazed her. "Your Majesty," a gruff voice interrupted her reverie. She turned to find Captain Morris, the head of her personal guard, his scarred face split by an uncharacteristic grin. "The men wanted me to tell you that we're honoured to protect not just our queen, but the future of the royal line. That child will be the most defended baby in supernatural history." Lyra laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I have no doubt of that, Captain, though I suspect they'll need protection from being completely spoiled rather than from external threats." As the celebration swirled around them, as their people shared their happiness and began making plans for the baby who would grow up surrounded by love and protection, Lyra leaned into Kieran's embrace and marvelled at the miracle of her life. 6 months ago, she had been nobody. Today she was everything she had never dared to dream of becoming: a queen, a mate, and soon a mother. The invisible servant girl was gone forever, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and used her power to lift others up. The future stretched ahead of them bright with possibility, and she had never been more ready to embrace whatever came next. The attack came at dawn, just as it had 8 months ago, but this time the enemy underestimated everything their target had become. Lyra woke to the sound of warning horns echoing across the mountain peaks, her enhanced senses immediately cataloguing the threat, even as her hand instinctively moved to the gentle swell of her belly, where their child grew strong and protected. 4 months along now, and the baby's presence had only strengthened her connection to the ancient magic that flowed through Nightshade blood. The Shadowfang pack, Kieran said, already moving toward the weapons cache they kept in their chambers. His wolf was at the surface, silver eyes blazing with the protective fury of a mate whose family was threatened. "They're moving through the Eastern Pass with at least 200 fighters." Lyra rose from bed with fluid grace, her pregnancy barely slowing movements that had been honed by months of training with the Royal Guard. The child she carried was strong, its supernatural heritage already manifesting in ways that amazed even Elder Morrigan, but it was also completely safe within the protective cocoon of her enhanced abilities. "They think I'll be weak," she said, reaching for the ceremonial armour that had been crafted specifically for her role as warrior queen. "They think pregnancy has made me vulnerable." Have they ever been more wrong about anything? Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade as he helped her with the intricate buckles that accommodated her changing body. Should we tell them what pregnant nightshade queens are capable of, or let them discover it firsthand? The answer came in the form of another horn blast, closer now, followed by the sound of clashing steel from the outer courtyards. The Shadowfang pack had made their choice, and now they would face the consequences of threatening a queen who had learned to channel fury into precision. They reached the battlements to find their forces already engaged, pack warriors defending their territory with the kind of fierce loyalty that came from serving rulers who had earned their devotion. But the attackers were numerous and well-trained, their strategy clearly designed to overwhelm through sheer force rather than tactical brilliance. "They're trying to draw us down into close combat," Captain Morris reported, his scarred face grim with tactical assessment. "Force you to fight on ground level where their numbers give them the advantage." "Then we don't give them what they want," Lyra replied, silver light beginning to flicker around her hands as she called upon power that had grown stronger rather than weaker during her pregnancy. "We end this from here." She moved to the edge of the battlements, her enhanced vision cataloguing enemy positions with supernatural clarity. The Shadowfang fighters had arranged themselves in the courtyard below, confident that their target would have to come down to them, never imagining that a Nightshade Queen could reach them from 3 stories up. "My love," Kieran said, his voice carrying both concern and absolute faith, "show them what happens when they threaten our family." The power that erupted from Lyra was unlike anything she had wielded before. Pregnancy hadn't weakened her connection to the ancient magic. It had amplified it, given her access to protective instincts that made her previous abilities seem like pale shadows. Lightning blazed from her fingertips, not the controlled strikes she had used in training, but raw elemental fury that spoke of a mother defending her young. The first bolt struck the centre of the enemy formation, scattering wolves like leaves before a hurricane. The second and third followed in rapid succession, each one perfectly targeted to disable rather than kill, her enhanced precision allowing her to neutralize threats without unnecessary slaughter. But the Shadowfang pack had come prepared for supernatural opposition. Their alpha, a massive grey wolf whose eyes burned with fanatical determination, began to shift even as her lightning rained down around him. His transformation was different from anything she had seen before, his wolf form enhanced with scars that looked deliberately carved, markings that spoke of dark rituals and forbidden magic. "Blood magic," Kieran snarled, his own wolf surging to the surface in response to the corrupted power radiating from their enemy. "They've been experimenting with Shadow Court techniques." The enhanced alpha moved faster than natural law should have allowed, leaping impossible distances to reach the base of the castle wall. His claws, dripping with some kind of poison that made the stone hiss where it touched, began to climb toward the battlements with inhuman speed. "He's coming for you!" Captain Morris shouted, drawing his sword, even though they all knew conventional weapons would be useless against magically enhanced enemies. "We need to get you to the safe room." "No." Lyra's voice carried absolute authority, the tone of a queen who had never retreated from a fight and wouldn't start now. "He wants to face me. Then he can face what I've become." She moved to meet the climbing alpha, her own power blazing brighter as maternal instincts combined with royal fury to create something magnificent and terrible. When he crested the battlements, when his poisoned claws reached for her throat, she was ready. The collision between legitimate power and corrupted magic sent shockwaves across the castle grounds. The Shadowfang Alpha was strong, enhanced by blood rituals that had cost the lives of innocents, but he was facing a Nightshade Queen whose power was amplified by the life growing within her. They fought across the battlements in a dance of silver light and shadow corruption, her lightning meeting his poison in explosions that lit the dawn sky like premature daybreak. But where his power came from death and sacrifice, hers flowed from love and protection, and that fundamental difference made all the difference in the world. "You think you're strong," the Alpha snarled, his enhanced form beginning to show signs of strain as her relentless attacks wore down his defences. "But you're just another pretender playing at royalty." "Am I?" Lyra's response came with a surge of power that sent him sliding backward across the stone, her silver eyes blazing with the certainty of someone who had claimed her identity through trial by fire. "Then why are you losing?" The question hung in the air for exactly the time it took her to gather the lightning that would end the fight. But before she could strike the final blow, before she could prove once and for all that maternal fury was the most dangerous force in the supernatural world, reinforcements arrived, not for the enemy, but for her. Pack wolves poured onto the battlements from every stairway and entrance, their faces bright with battle fury and absolute determination to protect their queen. Warriors who had served her faithfully for months, guards who had watched her grow from uncertain princess to confident ruler, servants who had been elevated from invisible drudges to valued family members. They surrounded the enhanced Alpha like a silver tide, not to steal her victory, but to ensure that she and their future heir remained safe while she claimed it. "This is what you never understood," Lyra said, her voice carrying over the sounds of battle as her people formed a protective circle around their royal family. "Power isn't about what you can take, it's about what others will give you willingly." The Alpha's enhanced abilities meant nothing against dozens of coordinated attackers who fought not from fear or compulsion, but from love. His blood magic had made him stronger and faster, but it hadn't taught him the tactical brilliance that came from years of fighting beside people who trusted each other completely. He fell beneath their combined assault, his corrupted power finally overwhelmed by the pure determination of wolves defending their chosen leaders. The remaining Shadowfang fighters, seeing their enhanced champion defeated by coordinated teamwork rather than individual prowess, began to retreat in disorder. "Let them go," Lyra commanded as some of her warriors moved to pursue the fleeing enemies. "They've learned what they came to learn. Word will spread that attacking a pregnant Nightshade Queen is the fastest way to discover why our bloodline has survived for 1,000 years." As the sounds of battle faded, as her people began the task of securing the battlements and treating the wounded, Kieran moved to her side with the mixture of pride and concern that had become his signature expression whenever she demonstrated her capabilities. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving automatically to check for injuries, even though they both knew her enhanced abilities made serious harm nearly impossible. "Not even close," she replied, leaning into his embrace while her free hand rested on their child. "If anything, I feel stronger than ever, more connected to the magic, more certain of who I'm meant to be." "And what are you meant to be?" he asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "A mother, a queen, a woman who protects what she loves and loves what she protects." She looked out over the courtyard where her people were celebrating another victory, another proof that their royal family was worth following into any danger. "I'm meant to be exactly what I've become." The battle was over, but its significance would echo through the supernatural world for generations. The pregnant queen who had faced magical enhancement with maternal fury and won. The pack that had stood united against impossible odds because their leaders had earned their devotion rather than demanding it. As they watched the sun rise over a battlefield where love had once again triumphed over corruption, Lyra felt the future stretching ahead of them, bright with promise. Their child would grow up in a world where power was earned through compassion, where strength was measured by the willingness to protect others, where being royal meant serving rather than ruling. It was exactly the kind of world she had dreamed of during those long years of invisibility, and now she had the power to make those dreams reality. The servant girl was gone forever, but the queen she had become was just getting started. 1 year had passed since the Great Awakening, and the Northern Territories had never known such peace. Lyra stood on the palace balcony, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, where their child would soon make its entrance into the world. 7 months along now, and the baby's supernatural heritage had made itself known in ways that filled even Elder Morrigan with wonder. The child was strong, its presence a constant warm glow in her consciousness, and its power already harmonizing with the ancient magic that flowed through the castle stones. Below her, the kingdom she had helped build stretched out in all directions. Villages that had once struggled with poverty now thrived under fair taxation and royal investment. Trade routes that had been abandoned due to territorial disputes were busy with merchants who knew their safety was guaranteed by a queen who actually cared about their welfare. Children played in courtyards that had once echoed with fear, their laughter carrying on winds that spoke of hope fulfilled. "Admiring your handiwork?" Kieran's voice was warm with affection as he joined her at the balcony railing, his arms coming around her from behind to cradle both her and their unborn child. "Our handiwork," she corrected, leaning back against his solid warmth. The mate bond hummed between them, deeper and richer than ever after a year of shared challenges and quiet triumphs. "I couldn't have built any of this without you." "You built all of this by being exactly who you are," he replied, his hands moving gently over her rounded belly. Compassionate, strong, determined to use power for protection rather than domination. "Our people love you not because you're royal, but because you've proven that royalty can mean service instead of selfishness." It was true. The reforms she had implemented had transformed not just the territory, but the very concept of what it meant to rule. Laws that protected the vulnerable, trade agreements that benefited farmers as much as nobles, educational programs that gave every child the chance to develop their abilities regardless of their birth pack. She had taken her memory of being invisible and powerless and used it to ensure that no one under her protection would ever feel that kind of abandonment. The council meeting went well, she asked, though the contentment radiating through their bond had already given her the answer. Better than well, the Eastern Pacts have agreed to the Mutual Defence Treaty, and the Southern Territories want to negotiate similar trade agreements to what we established with the mountain clans. His voice carried satisfaction and something deeper, the pride of a king who had found his perfect partner in ruling. Word is spreading that the Northern Territories are prosperous, peaceful, and actually pleasant to live in. We're getting requests for citizenship from wolves who want to raise their families somewhere safe. Lyra smiled, remembering the terrified servant girl who had once believed she would spend her entire life invisible and unwanted. Now she was building a kingdom where no one had to hide, where every person's contribution was valued, where strength was measured by the willingness to protect rather than the ability to dominate. "And Seraphina?" she asked, though the question carried no malice. The woman who had once tormented her was now serving a reduced sentence in the rehabilitation program Lyra had established for wolves whose crimes stemmed from desperation rather than true evil. "Making progress," Kieran replied, with the magnanimous tone of someone whose happiness was too complete to hold grudges. "Elder Morrigan says she's been helping with the younger trainees, teaching them about the dangers of seeking power through shortcuts. Apparently, she's quite effective at explaining why blood magic always fails in the end. Redemption rather than revenge. It was one of the principles that had guided Lyra's reign from the beginning. the understanding that broken people could often be healed if someone was willing to invest in their potential rather than simply punishing their failures. A flutter of movement in her belly made them both pause, Kieran's hands stilling as their child responded to the sound of his voice with what Elder Morrigan insisted was recognition. "They're going to be powerful," Lyra murmured, wonder filling her voice as she felt the baby's supernatural energy pulse in harmony with both their parents. "I can feel it already, the way they respond to emotions, to magic, to the castle itself." "They're going to be loved," Kieran corrected gently. "Powerful, yes, but more importantly, they're going to grow up knowing they're cherished for who they are, not what they can do. They'll never have to earn their place in this world." The words carried echoes of her own childhood, of the years spent believing she had to prove her worth through service and invisibility. Their child would know from birth that they were precious simply because they existed, that their parents' love was unconditional and absolute. "What should we name them?" she asked, the question that had been occupying her thoughts more frequently as her due date approached. "If it's a girl," Kieran said, his voice soft with memory, "I'd like to honour your mother. Luna was a beautiful name for a queen who gave her life to protect what mattered most." Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes, emotion making her voice thick. "And if it's a boy?" "Then we honour the future rather than the past, something that speaks of hope, of new beginnings, of all the possibilities we're building for them." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their peaceful kingdom while their child moved gently in the warm sanctuary of her body. This was happiness, Lyra realised, not the desperate joy of survival or the frantic relief of crisis overcome, but the deep, settled contentment of a life lived with purpose and love. "Do you ever miss it?" Kieran asked suddenly. "The simplicity of being invisible, the safety of not being responsible for so many lives?" Lyra considered the question seriously, remembering the girl who had scrubbed floors and believed herself worthless. There had been a kind of peace in invisibility, the safety of never being noticed or expected to achieve anything significant. "No," she said finally, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "I don't miss being invisible because I was never truly invisible. I was just hiding from who I was meant to be. This." She gestured at the thriving kingdom spread below them, at the child growing within her, at the man whose love had helped her discover her own worth. "This is who I always was, underneath all that fear and doubt. The servant who saved others even when she couldn't save herself," he agreed, understanding exactly what she meant. "The girl who showed kindness to everyone because she knew what it felt like to receive none. You didn't become someone different, my love. You just finally became yourself." As if summoned by their conversation, Elder Morrigan appeared in the doorway behind them, her ancient face bright with the mixture of joy and barely contained excitement that had been her constant expression since learning of the pregnancy. "Your Majesty," she said, though her tone carried affection rather than formality, "I have news from the kingdom's borders. A messenger arrived with reports from the southern territories, and I think you'll want to hear this immediately." Lyra turned, one hand still resting on her belly, curious about what could bring such obvious delight to the elder's features. "The wolves fleeing the Blood Moon Pack's civil war," Morrigan continued. "They're not just seeking temporary shelter anymore. They want to stay permanently. They're calling our territory the kingdom where the broken are made whole, and every refugee who settles here sends word back to others who are suffering under cruel leadership." "How many?" Kieran asked, his strategic mind already calculating resources and logistics. 200 families so far, with more arriving every week, all of them skilled workers, grateful for the chance to build better lives, eager to contribute to the kingdom that welcomed them when they had nowhere else to go. Lyra felt her heart swell with pride and purpose. They were building something unprecedented in the supernatural world, a kingdom founded not on power and dominance, but on compassion and inclusion. A place where anyone could find belonging if they were willing to contribute to the common good. We'll need to expand the settlement programs, she said, her mind already working through the practical details of accommodating so many new citizens. More housing, additional schools for the children, expanded training programs for adults who want to develop new skills. Already in progress, Morrigan replied with obvious satisfaction. The original pack members have been volunteering to help with construction and integration. They're proud of what you've built here, Your Majesty, and they want to be part of making it even better. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as their child settled into sleep within the warm safety of her body, Lyra marvelled at the miracle of her life. 18 months ago, she had been nobody, nothing, a servant girl who believed herself broken and worthless. Tonight, she stood as queen of the most prosperous and peaceful territory in the supernatural world, carrying the next generation of a bloodline that would grow up knowing that true power came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. "I love you," Kieran whispered against her ear, his voice carrying all the wonder and gratitude that filled her own heart. "I love you too," she replied, turning in his arms to see her own joy reflected in his silver eyes. Forever and always, through every challenge and every triumph, until the end of time itself. They were no longer the servant and the king who had met by impossible chance. They were partners, equals, two souls who had found their perfect complement and used that strength to build something beautiful. As they stood together on the balcony of their castle, watching over the kingdom they had created through love and determination, Lyra finally understood the truth that had taken her so long to accept. She had never been nothing. She had always been everything she was meant to be, just waiting for the right moment to shine. The morning arrived with cruel efficiency, dragging Lyra from her restless sleep before dawn had fully broken. She had dreamed of golden eyes and silver wolves, of voices calling her name in languages she didn't recognize, and she woke with her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she couldn't name. Today was the day. The Alpha King would arrive, and everything would change for Seraphina. The entire pack buzzed with nervous energy, servants rushing through corridors with final preparations, guards taking their positions, and the unmistakable scent of anticipation hanging thick in the air. Lyra pulled on her worn grey dress and tied her dark hair back in a simple braid, making herself as unremarkable as possible. She would spend today in the kitchens, safely hidden away from the grand ceremony that would reshape their world. But first she had to survive the morning preparations. The great hall had been transformed overnight into something that belonged in fairy tales. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their petals scattered across marble floors that reflected the dancing light of crystal chandeliers. The altar at the far end stood draped in silver and gold, the ancient symbols of mating carved into the stone, glowing faintly with supernatural power. Lyra entered through the servants' entrance, carrying fresh linens for the guest chambers, her eyes carefully fixed on the floor. She had learned long ago that looking too long at beautiful things only reminded her of everything she could never have. "You there, girl." The sharp voice belonged to Beta Marcus, Seraphina's father, and one of the most powerful wolves in the pack. His presence commanded immediate attention, his wolf radiating authority that made Lyra's skin crawl with the instinctive need to submit. "The Alpha King's chambers, fresh linens, water basins, and make sure everything is perfect. One mistake today, and I'll have you thrown from the territory." "Yes, Beta Marcus," Lyra whispered, clutching the linens tighter against her chest. "I understand." His cold eyes swept over her dismissively. "See that you do, and stay out of sight once he arrives. The Alpha King doesn't need to be reminded that we keep defective wolves in our pack." The words hit exactly where they were meant to, driving the blade of shame deeper into wounds that never quite healed. Defective, broken, wrong. The same words she had heard her entire life, but they never stopped cutting. Lyra nodded and hurried away, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She navigated the back corridors toward the royal wing, a section of the castle she rarely entered. Here, everything was grander, more beautiful, touched with the kind of luxury reserved for those who actually mattered. The Alpha King's chambers were magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the mountains, heavy curtains in deep burgundy framed the view, and the massive bed could have slept 4 people comfortably. Lyra worked quickly and efficiently, changing linens, arranging fresh flowers, ensuring every surface gleamed. She was smoothing the final wrinkle from the silk coverlet when she felt it. A presence, massive and overwhelming, and entirely unlike anything she had ever experienced. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with power that made her wolfless blood sing with recognition she didn't understand. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself invisible before— "Who are you?" The voice was deep, rough with authority, and something else she couldn't identify. Lyra spun around, her heart stopping completely when her eyes met his. Alpha King Kieran Blackthorne stood in the doorway, and he was nothing like the paintings. He was bigger, broader, more intensely male than any image could capture. His dark hair was slightly mussed from travel, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes were the most impossible shade of silver she had ever seen. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the very air around him shimmer with supernatural energy. But it was his scent that nearly brought her to her knees, pine and winter storms and something wild and clean that spoke to parts of her she didn't know existed. Her entire body responded to it, every nerve ending suddenly alive in ways that terrified her. I'm sorry, Your Majesty," she stammered, dropping into the deepest curtsy she could manage without falling over. "I was just finishing the room preparations. I'll leave immediately." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her cold. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. The alpha command in his voice compelled obedience, dragging her gaze up to meet his, despite every instinct that told her to keep her eyes down, to stay invisible, to never attract the attention of someone so far above her station. The moment their eyes met, the world exploded. Golden light blazed between them, visible threads of pure energy that connected her heart to his like chains forged from starfire. The mate bond. Impossible, undeniable, burning through every defence she had built around her heart. She heard him suck in a sharp breath, saw his silver eyes widen with the same shock that was currently destroying her ability to think. Mate. The word echoed in her head, and she did not know if it came from her wolf, the wolf she didn't have, or from the ancient presence she could suddenly sense examining her, or from him. "No," she whispered, the word torn from her throat like a prayer. "No, this isn't possible." But even as she said it, she could feel the truth burning in her chest. The bond pulsed between them, golden and warm and absolutely real, connecting her to the most powerful wolf in their world. The Alpha King, who was supposed to mate with Seraphina in 3 hours, was staring at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. His wolf surged to the surface, silver light flickering in his eyes, as the ancient beast recognized what his human mind was struggling to accept. When he spoke, his voice was rougher, deeper, touched with the authority of a creature that had never been denied. "What is your name?" "Lyra," she breathed, unable to look away from him, unable to break the connection that was rewriting every truth she had ever known about herself. "Lyra Nightshade." "Nightshade?" Something flickered across his face, recognition and confusion warring in his expression. The bloodline was thought to be extinct. She shook her head frantically. "No, Your Majesty, you don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm just a servant. I don't have a wolf. I can't shift. This is a mistake, some kind of—" "My wolf doesn't make mistakes." The certainty in his voice cut through her protests like a blade. "And neither does the mate bond." The golden threads between them pulsed brighter, and Lyra felt something deep inside her chest crack open, like a door that had been sealed for her entire life finally beginning to give way. Power whispered at the edges of her consciousness, ancient and patient and vast, as if something that had been sleeping for 18 years was finally starting to wake. Before she could process what was happening, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Familiar voices approaching, Seraphina's laughter ringing like crystal bells as she spoke to her entourage about final preparations for her mating ceremony. The reality of their situation crashed over Lyra like ice water. In 3 hours, this man was supposed to bind himself to another woman in front of the entire pack. In 3 hours, he was supposed to make Seraphina his queen. And here he stood, mate bond blazing between them like a beacon, staring at the pack's unwanted servant girl like she was the most precious thing in the world. "This can't happen," she whispered, backing toward the window, even though there was nowhere to run. "You're supposed to mate with Seraphina. The entire pack is depending on this alliance. I'm nothing. I'm nobody. I can't—" "You are my mate." The words were gentle but implacable, spoken with the authority of someone who had never doubted his own power. Everything else is politics. But politics, Lyra knew, had a way of destroying people like her. The voices in the corridor grew closer, and panic clawed at her throat. If they were found like this, if anyone saw the mate bond blazing between them, it would mean death for her and political disaster for him. She had to run. She had to hide. She had to pretend this miracle had never happened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and bolted for the servant's entrance. She heard him call her name, heard the authority and command in his voice, but she didn't stop. She ran through corridors that blurred with tears she refused to acknowledge, past servants who scattered out of her way, down stairs that seemed to stretch forever. She didn't stop running until she reached the kitchens, where cook took one look at her face and immediately put her to work kneading bread with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. But even 3 floors down and hidden among the ovens and prep tables, Lyra could feel him. The mate bond stretched between them like a golden chain, carrying whispers of his emotions, his confusion, his certainty. Every breath she took was flavoured with his scent. Every heartbeat echoed with the rhythm of his. In 2 hours, he would walk down the aisle and take Seraphina's hands in his. He would speak the ancient words that bound wolves together for eternity. And Lyra would feel every moment of it through the connection that branded her as his and him as hers. The bread dough tore beneath her hands, and she realised she was crying. Mate bonds, she had heard, could not be denied, but they could be ignored. They could be sacrificed for duty, for politics, for the greater good. And if the stories were true, they could drive both partners slowly, inevitably insane with the pain of separation. But what choice did they have? What choice did she have? She was nobody. He was everything. And in 2 hours, he would belong to someone else. The ceremony had been postponed. The whispers started in the kitchens and spread like wildfire through the servant corridors, each telling more dramatic than the last. The Alpha King had called for a delay, citing the need to review territorial agreements. Some said he looked pale, distracted. Others claimed his wolf had been restless, pacing behind his eyes like a caged beast. Lyra kept her head down and her hands busy, kneading dough with mechanical precision while her world crumbled around her. She could feel him through the bond, a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness. His confusion, his conflict, the way his wolf prowled just beneath his skin, demanding something he couldn't give it. 3 days had passed since their eyes met in his chambers. 3 days of her hiding in the kitchens. 3 days of him sending servants to find her. 3 days of her making herself invisible in ways that had nothing to do with her lack of a wolf. But invisibility, she was learning, had its limits. "There you are." The voice belonged to Elder Morrigan, the pack's oldest and wisest member, a woman whose silver hair spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. She stood in the kitchen doorway like a pillar of ancient authority, her pale eyes fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Elder Morrigan," Lyra whispered, dropping into a curtsy despite her flower-covered hands. "How may I serve you?" The old woman's eyes narrowed, studying her with the focus of someone reading a particularly complex text. "Walk with me, child. There are things we need to discuss." It wasn't a request. Elder Morrigan turned and walked away, clearly expecting to be followed, and Lyra had no choice but to wash her hands quickly and trail after her. They walked in silence through corridors Lyra rarely saw, past tapestries that depicted the great wolves of legend, upstairs that led to the tower chambers where the pack's most sacred artifacts were kept. The room Morrigan led her to was circular, its walls lined with books that smelled of ancient secrets and forgotten magic. Candles flickered from every surface, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. At the centre of the room stood a simple wooden table, and on it a silver bowl that gleamed with its own inner light. "May, sit," Morrigan commanded, settling into a chair that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of oak. "And tell me why the Alpha King's wolf is going insane." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean." "Child." The word carried the weight of centuries. "I have been alive for 400 years. I was ancient when your grandmother's grandmother was born. Do not insult me with lies." The words hit like a physical blow. Grandmother's grandmother, family, bloodline, things Lyra had never been told she possessed. "You know something," she whispered, settling into the chair across from the elder, "about my family." Morrigan's smile was sad and knowing. "I know many things, dear one. I know that the Nightshade bloodline was declared extinct 60 years ago after a terrible tragedy. I know that sometimes, when bloodlines carry too much power, it becomes necessary to hide that power from those who would use it for evil. And I know that you, Lyra Nightshade, are no more wolfless than I am human." The words struck her like lightning, illuminating truths she had never dared to imagine. "That's impossible. I've never shifted. I can't even sense other wolves' emotions like normal pack members can. I'm nothing." "Are you?" Morrigan reached for the silver bowl, her weathered hands sure and steady. "Tell me, child, have you been having dreams lately? Dreams of silver wolves and ancient forests? Dreams of voices calling your name?" Lyra's breath caught. The dreams had been getting stronger every night since she met the Alpha King, vivid and strange and filled with images that felt more like memories than imagination. "How did you—" "Because your wolf is waking up." Morrigan pricked her finger with a small silver knife, letting 3 drops of blood fall into the bowl. "The mate bond has cracked the suppression spell that was placed on you at birth. Your true nature is fighting to be free." "Suppression spell?" The words felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she had forgotten. "What suppression spell?" The elder's eyes filled with something that might have been grief. "The one your mother begged me to cast as she lay dying, her mate bond shattered and her heart broken. The one that saved your life by making you invisible to the enemies who had already murdered the rest of your bloodline." The room spun around her. "My mother? She's dead?" "Child." Morrigan's voice was infinitely gentle. "Your parents were the last of the royal Nightshade line. Your father was a prince of the old blood, your mother a warrior queen, whose wolf was silver, and whose power could command the very elements. They were murdered when you were 3 days old, killed by those who feared what their child might become." Royal princess. The words crashed over her like waves, each one destroying another lie she had built her life around. "But I was raised here. Beta Marcus said I was an orphan he took in out of charity." "Beta Marcus knows nothing of your true heritage. As far as he or anyone else is concerned, you are exactly what you appear to be, a wolfless servant girl whose parents died in a border skirmish." Morrigan stirred the blood in the bowl with a silver spoon, and the liquid began to glow with soft white light. But blood doesn't lie, dear one, and your blood remembers what you were born to be. She held out the bowl. Drink. What will it do? It will begin to break the suppression spell. It will allow your wolf to surface slowly and safely, instead of all at once in a moment of crisis. Morrigan's expression grew grave. Because make no mistake, child, your wolf will emerge. The mate bond has seen to that. The only question is whether it happens on your terms or whether it tears you apart from the inside out. Lyra stared at the glowing liquid, her hands trembling. 18 years of being nothing, of being invisible, of believing she was broken and defective and worthless. And now this woman was telling her it had all been a lie designed to keep her safe. "The Alpha King," she whispered. "Does he know?" "His wolf knows. Ancient bloodlines recognize each other, even through suppression spells. That's why he's been stalking the corridors like a madman for 3 days, why he keeps sending servants to find you." Morrigan leaned forward. "That's why the mate bond blazed so bright it could be seen from the courtyard." Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks. People saw. Everyone saw, dear one, including Lady Seraphina. The elder's expression darkened. "Which is why you need to make this choice quickly. She knows what you are to him now, and she will not suffer a rival to live." As if summoned by her words, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Multiple sets, moving with purpose, accompanied by the rustle of silk and the sharp click of heeled boots. Seraphina's voice drifted through the door, sweet as poisoned honey. "Are you quite certain she went this way? I simply must speak with her about her duties." Lyra's blood turned to ice. The saccharine tone, the false concern, the barely contained rage simmering beneath the words. She had heard that tone before, always right before Seraphina's cruelty reached new heights. "Drink!" Morrigan hissed, pressing the bowl into Lyra's hands. "Now, before she—" The door burst open. Seraphina stood framed in the doorway like an avenging angel, her golden hair perfectly coiffed, her silk gown the colour of fresh blood. Behind her clustered 3 of her closest followers, their faces bright with anticipation of whatever entertainment was about to unfold. "Well, well," Seraphina purred, her green eyes fixed on Lyra with predatory intensity. The little servant girl, hiding away in the forbidden tower, how inappropriate. She stepped into the room, her presence filling the space like toxic perfume. "I've been looking everywhere for you, dear. We need to have a conversation about boundaries, about knowing one's place, about the dangers of reaching above one's station." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Lyra clutched the bowl tighter, feeling the warm liquid slosh against her palms. "Lady Seraphina," Morrigan said, rising from her chair with the dignity of centuries. "This is a private consultation. I must ask you to—" "Must you?" Seraphina's laugh was like breaking glass. "How strange. I wasn't aware that servants were entitled to privacy, especially not with matters concerning the pack's security." Her eyes glittered with malice. After all, when a wolfless nobody suddenly becomes the object of the Alpha King's attention, well, that raises questions about loyalty, doesn't it? She took another step forward, and Lyra could smell the jealousy rolling off her in waves, bitter and sharp and dangerous. "Tell me, little wolf," Seraphina continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a shout. "What exactly did you do to bewitch him? What pathetic trick did you use to make him notice something as worthless as you?" "I didn't—" "Don't lie to me." The words cracked like a whip. "I saw the way he looked at you. I saw the bond light that everyone is whispering about. You've somehow convinced him you're his mate, but we both know that's impossible, don't we? After all, you don't even have a wolf." Seraphina was close enough now that Lyra could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, could smell the expensive perfume that couldn't quite mask the scent of her wolf's rage. "So I'm going to give you one chance to confess. What spell did you cast? What potion did you slip into his drink? What desperate, pathetic magic did you use to trap the most powerful man in our world?" "I didn't do anything," Lyra whispered, clutching the bowl so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I never asked for this. I never wanted—" "Liar." The slap came without warning, sharp and vicious, snapping Lyra's head to the side and sending the silver bowl flying from her hands. It shattered against the stone floor, the glowing liquid spreading in a puddle that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. And then everything changed. Power exploded through the room like a shockwave, ancient and vast and absolutely primal. The candles flared so bright they became miniature suns. The books on the shelves rattled in their bindings, and every wolf in the castle felt the surge of awakening magic like thunder in their bones. Lyra's eyes snapped open, and they were no longer brown. They were silver, bright as starlight and ancient as the moon. And when she looked at Seraphina, the other woman stumbled backward with a gasp of pure terror. "Impossible," Seraphina breathed. But the wolf, stretching and yawning behind Lyra's eyes after 18 years of sleep, disagreed. The power surge had been felt throughout the entire castle. Lyra knelt on the stone floor of Elder Morrigan's chamber, surrounded by the shattered remains of the silver bowl, her body trembling as ancient magic coursed through her veins like liquid fire. The silver light in her eyes flickered and danced, sometimes bright as stars, sometimes dimming to the brown she had worn her entire life. Her wolf was fighting to be free, clawing at the barriers that had contained it for 18 years, and the sensation was agony and ecstasy rolled into something that threatened to tear her apart from the inside out. Seraphina had fled the moment those impossible silver eyes opened, her entourage scattering like leaves before a storm. But her parting words still echoed in the chamber, sharp with promise and venom. "This isn't over, you pathetic creature. Royal blood or not, you're still nothing, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." "Breathe, child." Elder Morrigan knelt beside her, ancient hands steady and sure as they pressed against Lyra's shoulders. "The awakening is always difficult, but you must not fight it. Let your wolf rise slowly, or the shock will destroy you both." "It hurts," Lyra gasped, her voice rougher than it had ever been, touched with harmonics that spoke of things wild and primal. "Everything hurts." "Because everything you are is changing." Morrigan's voice was infinitely gentle. "The girl who scrubbed floors and believed herself worthless is dying, dear one. The princess who was always meant to be is taking her place." Princess. The word still felt impossible on her tongue, but something deep in her bones recognized the truth of it. Ancient memories were surfacing, fragments of power and purpose that had been buried beneath 18 years of deliberate invisibility. She remembered silver fur and golden eyes, a woman's voice, desperate and loving, whispering protection spells over a newborn child, the taste of moonlight and the song of wind through mountain peaks, her mother, the warrior queen with the silver wolf. "Tell me about her," Lyra whispered, struggling to her feet as the worst of the power surge ebbed. "Tell me about my mother." Morrigan's eyes grew distant with memory. Luna Nightshade was the most powerful wolf of her generation. Her bloodline traced back to the first packs, to the ancient ones who could speak with the moon itself. She could command storms, call lightning from clear skies, and her wolf— the elder smiled sadly. Her wolf was silver as starlight and twice as beautiful. She moved to one of the bookcases, pulling out a leather-bound tome that looked older than the castle itself. But power like that always comes with a price. There were those who feared what the Nightshade line represented, who believed that such ancient magic had no place in the modern world. The book fell open to a page filled with symbols that seemed to move and shift before Lyra's eyes, runes that spoke of binding and blood, and prices paid in darkness. "The Shadow Court," Morrigan continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Wolves who had given up their humanity in exchange for forbidden power. They hunted your parents for 3 years, always one step behind, always closing in. When you were born, they knew they had run out of time. The images rose unbidden in Lyra's mind, a desperate flight through moonlit forests, her father's strong arms carrying her while her mother fought off attackers with silver claws and lightning strikes, the smell of smoke and blood. Her mother's voice, cracked with exhaustion but still fierce with love. "Hide her, Morrigan. Make her invisible. Keep her safe until she's strong enough to reclaim what was stolen." "The suppression spell," Lyra breathed, understanding flooding through her like cold water. "You didn't just hide my wolf, you hid my entire bloodline, my magic, everything that made me a target. I bound your power so deeply that even you couldn't sense it. I made you forgettable, unremarkable, the kind of person eyes slide past without seeing." Morrigan's fingers traced the ancient runes. "It was the only way to keep you alive long enough to grow strong enough to survive what you truly are. And now? Now, the mate bond has done what 18 years of safety could not. It has given your wolf something worth fighting for, something worth breaking free for." The elder's smile was proud and sad in equal measure. "You cannot suppress a nightshade when she has found her mate." As if summoned by her words, power crashed against Lyra's consciousness like a wave against a seawall. Not her power this time, but his. The Alpha King was coming, drawn by the magical surge that had shaken the castle, his wolf demanding to know if his mate was safe. She could feel him through the bond now, stronger and clearer than ever before. His concern, his barely controlled rage at sensing her distress, the way his wolf paced behind his eyes like a caged predator. He was 3 floors down and climbing fast, taking the stairs 3 at a time in his urgency to reach her. "He's coming," she whispered, panic clawing at her throat. "He felt what happened. He's—" "Of course he is." Morrigan began gathering the scattered remains of the silver bowl, her movements calm and efficient. "Mate bonds are strongest during times of crisis or change. Your awakening would have hit him like a physical blow." The footsteps in the corridor were unmistakable now, heavy and purposeful, and moving with the kind of speed that suggested barely leashed control. Lyra pressed her back against the wall, her newly sensitive hearing picking up the way his breathing had changed, the slight growl that coloured each exhale. The door didn't so much open as explode inward. Alpha King Kieran Blackthorne filled the doorway like an avenging god, his silver eyes blazing with supernatural light and his power radiating outward in waves that made the very air shimmer. He was magnificent and terrible and entirely focused on her, his gaze sweeping over her body as if checking for injuries before locking onto her eyes. The moment their gazes met, the mate bond flared to life between them, golden threads of connection that were somehow stronger now, brighter, more real than they had been 3 days ago. Lyra felt his wolf's satisfaction at finding her safe, felt the way her own newly awakened beast recognised and responded to his presence with a purr of contentment that vibrated through her bones. "You're hurt," he said, crossing the room in 2 long strides. His hands hovered just above her arms, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I felt your pain through the bond. What happened?" "I'm not hurt," she whispered, though that wasn't entirely true. The awakening had left her feeling raw and exposed, like every nerve ending had been stripped bare. "I'm different." His nostrils flared as he scented her, and something that might have been wonder flickered across his face. "Your scent, it's changed, stronger, more—" He seemed to struggle for words. "More you." "Her wolf is awakening," Morrigan said, from where she knelt among the broken silver. "The suppression spell that hid her true nature for 18 years is finally breaking." Kieran's attention shifted to the elder, his expression sharpening with predatory focus. "Suppression spell?" "She is Lunar Nightshade's daughter," Morrigan said simply. the last of the royal bloodline that was thought extinct. The spell was cast to keep her safe from those who murdered her parents. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra watched emotions chase across the Alpha King's face. Shock, understanding, something that might have been relief, and beneath it all, a growing fury that made his wolf's light flicker dangerously behind his eyes. "Royal bloodline," he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "She's a princess." "She is a queen," Morrigan corrected gently. "Or she will be when her power fully awakens." Kieran's hands clenched into fists at his sides. 18 years. She's been hiding in plain sight for 18 years while that bitch treated her like a servant. The rage in his voice made Lyra's newly sensitive wolf whimper with the need to comfort him, to soothe the fury that threatened to spill over into violence. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm, her fingers barely grazing his skin. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Power flowed between them like lightning, the mate bond singing with recognition and completion. Kieran's eyes snapped to hers, silver blazing with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow felt like coming home. "Mine," he whispered, the word rough with possession and wonder. "You're mine." "I'm nobody's," she started to say, the old words automatic after years of being dismissed and discarded. "You're mine," he repeated, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "My mate, my queen, my everything." The words hit her like physical blows, each one cracking another piece of the armour she had built around her heart. For 18 years she had been nothing, nobody, invisible, and worthless. And now the most powerful man in their world was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered. "The ceremony," she breathed. "Seraphina, the alliance your pack needs." "Can burn for all I care." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and she realised she was crying. "Do you think any political alliance matters more than this? Do you think there's anything in this world I wouldn't sacrifice to keep you? My people need their true queen." His voice was fierce with certainty. "They need you, Lyra. Not some political arrangement designed to benefit a few powerful families, but the Luna they were always meant to have." Behind them, Elder Morrigan cleared her throat gently. "The awakening process will take time, Your Majesty. Days, possibly weeks for her power to fully emerge, and there will be those who question her legitimacy, who demand proof of her bloodline." "Then we'll give them proof." Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "Every wolf in this territory will witness her awakening. They'll see her wolf, her power, her true nature, and then they'll bow to their rightful queen." "And Seraphina?" Lyra asked, though she dreaded the answer. His expression darkened. "Seraphina will learn what happens to those who threaten what is mine." The promise in his voice was absolute, and Lyra felt her newly awakened wolf purr with satisfaction. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to fight for her. Someone saw her worth and would defend it against all challenges. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer nobody. She was the Alpha King's mate, and heaven help anyone who tried to take that away from her. The attack came at dawn. Lyra woke to the sound of shattering glass and the acrid smell of smoke, her newly awakened senses screaming warnings that her human mind struggled to process. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She had been staying in chambers near the Alpha King's wing for the past 2 days, her awakening power requiring careful monitoring as more memories surfaced and her wolf grew stronger. The suppression spell was unravelling like an old tapestry, threads of magic coming loose one by one, revealing the truth of what she had always been beneath the carefully constructed lie. But now, as she rolled out of bed and felt her bare feet hit the cold stone floor, every instinct she possessed was shrieking danger. The mate bond blazed to life in her chest, carrying Kieran's fury and alarm across the distance between them. He was in the Great Hall, she realized, his emotions a chaotic mix of protective rage and battle-ready focus. Something had threatened the pack, and his wolf was responding with lethal intent. Lyra grabbed the nearest robe and ran toward the window, her heart stopping completely when she saw what waited in the courtyard below. Wolves, dozens of them, circling the castle like a pack of predators, their eyes gleaming with unnatural red light that spoke of dark magic and forbidden power. Even from 3 stories up, she could feel the wrongness radiating from them, the way their presence seemed to leach the warmth from the very air. The Shadow Court had found her. Terror clawed at her throat, but before she could fully process what was happening, her chamber door exploded inward. Not Kieran this time, but 3 figures cloaked in darkness, their faces hidden behind masks that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Princess?" The centre figure spoke, its voice like grinding stone. "You've been very difficult to find." Power erupted from her without conscious thought, silver light blazing from her eyes as 18 years of suppressed magic finally found a target for its fury. The lead assassin flew backward into the wall with bone-crushing force, but the other 2 were already moving, faster than human, their claws extended and dripping with something that smelled like poison and death. Lyra's wolf surged to the surface, no longer the tentative awakening of the past few days, but a full manifestation of ancient royal power. Her bones began to crack and lengthen, her spine extending as her face pushed forward into a muzzle, and the pain was exquisite and terrible, and somehow exactly what she had been born for. The shift happened in seconds rather than minutes, her human form dissolving into something magnificent and deadly. When she opened her eyes, the world looked different, sharper, more vivid. Every scent told a story, every sound carried meaning, and the 3 assassins reeked of fear beneath their magical concealment. She was silver, not grey like most wolves, not white like the Arctic breeds, but silver like starlight and moonbeams, her fur carrying its own luminescence that made the darkness flee from her presence. She was larger than any normal wolf had a right to be, nearly the size of a small horse with eyes that burned like captured stars. The remaining 2 assassins hesitated, clearly not expecting their helpless target to be capable of such a transformation. That hesitation cost them everything. Lyra moved like liquid lightning, her claws tearing through the nearest attacker's throat before he could raise his poisoned blade. The 3rd tried to run, but royal wolves were built for hunting, and there was nowhere in the castle he could go that she couldn't follow. She brought him down in the corridor outside her chambers, her jaws locking around his spine with crushing force. He died without making a sound, his body dissolving into shadow and ash the moment life left it. But even as the immediate threat ended, she could feel more enemies moving through the castle, their dark magic pressing against her newly awakened senses like a physical weight. They had come in force this time, determined to finish what they had started 18 years ago. The mate bond pulsed with urgent warning. Kieran was fighting something in the Great Hall, multiple opponents moving with coordinated precision. He was powerful, possibly the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, but even he couldn't fight an entire army alone. Lyra ran through corridors that had never seen her true form, her silver paws silent on stone floors as she followed the scent of battle and blood. Servants pressed themselves against walls as she passed, their eyes wide with shock and something that might have been recognition. The castle's wolves were responding to her presence, she realised, their instincts recognising the royal bloodline, even if their minds couldn't quite process what they were seeing. She reached the Great Hall to find chaos. The beautiful chamber where her mating ceremony was supposed to have taken place had been transformed into a battlefield. Shadow Court assassins filled the space, their red-eyed wolves clashing with pack defenders in a melee of claws and fangs and supernatural fury. The air stank of blood and dark magic, and at the centre of it all, Kieran fought like a force of nature unleashed. His wolf was massive and midnight black, his jaws crushing enemies with terrifying efficiency, while his claws opened throats and shattered bones. But there were too many of them, and even as she watched, more assassins poured through the shattered windows, their numbers seemingly endless. Then one of them broke through the defensive line, moving with inhuman speed toward where Seraphina cowered behind an overturned table. Not to kill her, Lyra realized with sudden clarity, but to capture her. A hostage to use against Kieran, leverage to force his surrender. The assassin's claws were inches from Seraphina's throat when Lyra hit him. She moved faster than thought, silver light trailing behind her like a comet as she crossed the great hall in a single bound. Her impact sent the assassin flying into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone, and when he tried to rise, her claws opened his chest from neck to sternum. Seraphina stared up at her in absolute shock, her green eyes wide with disbelief and something that might have been the first stirrings of respect. "Impossible," she whispered. You're beautiful." But there was no time for conversation. More assassins were converging on their position, drawn by the flare of royal power, their red eyes burning with fanatic determination. Lyra placed herself between them and the cowering woman, her lips pulling back from fangs that gleamed like polished silver. The first assassin reached her with claws extended, expecting to overwhelm her through sheer force. Instead, he met power that had been building for 18 years, royal magic that carried the fury of murdered parents and a stolen childhood. Lightning crackled from her claws as she tore him apart, the very air around her charged with supernatural energy. The second attacker tried to circle behind her, but Lyra's newly awakened senses tracked his movement effortlessly. She spun and caught him mid-leap, her jaws clamping around his throat with bone-crushing force. He dissolved into shadow before his body hit the floor. Across the hall, Kieran's midnight wolf turned at the sound of her power, silver eyes meeting silver eyes across a battlefield painted in blood and magic. The recognition that passed between them was immediate and absolute. Not just mates recognizing each other, but equals acknowledging their shared strength. Together, they were unstoppable. The remaining Shadow Court assassins seemed to realize this at the same moment, their coordinated attack dissolving into panicked retreat as royal power blazed from both ends of the great hall. Those who tried to fight were torn apart by claws and fangs and lightning strikes. Those who tried to run found the exits blocked by pack wolves who had rallied to their leader's call. When the last assassin fell, dissolving into ash and shadow like all the others, the silence that followed was deafening. Lyra shifted back to human form slowly, her bones crackling as they reformed, her silver fur melting away to reveal pale skin marked with intricate patterns that looked like lightning frozen in flesh. The royal marks, she realized dimly, the signs of her awakened bloodline that would be visible to any wolf who looked upon her. She stood naked and magnificent in the center of carnage, power still crackling around her like visible heat, her silver eyes blazing with the confidence of someone who had finally discovered what she was capable of. Kieran shifted a moment later, his human form just as powerful as his wolf, just as overwhelming in its masculine beauty. He crossed the hall to her without seeming to notice his own nudity, his hands reaching for her with desperate need. "You saved her," he said, pulling her against his chest with gentle reverence. "You saved Seraphina." "She's Pack," Lyra replied simply, surprised by the roughness in her own voice. "I protect what's mine." The words felt right on her tongue, carried the weight of absolute truth. These people, this territory, this man who held her like she was the most precious thing in his world, they belonged to her now, and she would defend them with her life. Around them, the surviving pack members began to drop to their knees, their heads bowed in submission and recognition. Not to Kieran this time, but to her, the silver wolf who had fought like lightning given form, who had saved their lives and proven her royal bloodline beyond any doubt. "My queen!" Elder Morrigan's voice carried across the ruined hall, filled with pride and satisfaction. "Welcome home." Lyra looked out over the kneeling wolves, her people, her pack, and for the first time in her life she felt the bone-deep certainty of belonging. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer suppressed. She was exactly what she had always been meant to be, a queen. The days that followed the Shadow Court attack were a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Lyra stood before the mirror in her new chambers befitting a queen rather than a servant, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The royal marks that had appeared during her awakening curved along her collarbone like silver lightning, and her eyes held a depth of power that would have terrified her a week ago. The suppression spell was completely broken now, her wolf a constant, comforting presence in her mind, strong and fierce and utterly certain of who she was meant to be. But certainty, she was learning, came with a price. "The northern packs are demanding proof of your bloodline," Kieran said from where he stood by the window, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. They refused to acknowledge a queen who appeared from nowhere, regardless of what they witnessed in the great hall. Lyra turned from the mirror, her silk gown, deep midnight blue that complemented her silver marks, rustling softly. "And Seraphina?" His expression darkened. "Seraphina has been suspiciously quiet since the attack. Too quiet. She's planning something." The mate bond carried undercurrents of his concern, and Lyra felt her wolf's hackles rise in response. Seraphina had been different since the battle, her hatred tempered with something that might have been grudging respect. But respect from someone like her could be more dangerous than hatred. "She knows she's lost the political marriage," Lyra said, moving to stand beside him at the window. "But that doesn't mean she's accepted defeat." Below them, the castle grounds showed signs of increased security. Guards patrolled in pairs, and she could sense other wolves positioned at strategic points, their alertness a constant hum at the edge of her awareness. The Shadow Court might have been driven off, but everyone knew they would return. Ancient enemies didn't simply give up after one failed assassination attempt. "There's something else," Kieran continued, his voice dropping to the tone he used when delivering particularly unwelcome news. Elder Morrigan found references to a ritual in the old texts, something called the severing. Ice ran through Lyra's veins. Severing what? Mate bonds. His jaw clenched. Apparently there are ways to cut the connection between destined pairs, dark magic, blood sacrifice, forbidden rituals that were outlawed centuries ago. The mate bond pulsed between them, golden and warm and absolutely vital to her existence now. The thought of losing that connection, of having it torn away through magical violence, made her wolf whimper with distress. "You think Seraphina would—" "I think Seraphina would do anything to get what she believes is hers." Kieran's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And if she can't have me willingly, she'll find a way to break what we have and force the bond." Before Lyra could respond, a knock echoed through the chamber. Not the respectful tap of a servant, but the sharp, demanding sound of someone who expected immediate attention. "Enter," Kieran called, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. The door opened to reveal Beta Marcus, his expression a carefully controlled mask that didn't quite hide the rage simmering beneath the surface. Behind him stood 3 other pack elders, their faces grave with whatever news they brought. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his tone formally correct but lacking any warmth. "We need to speak with you, privately." Kieran's arm moved protectively around Lyra's waist. "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my mate." "Can it?" Marcus's eyes flicked to Lyra with barely concealed contempt. "Even if it concerns her legitimacy as queen?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Lyra felt her newly awakened power stir in response to the threat. Her wolf didn't appreciate being questioned by someone it considered beneath their station. "Speak!" Kieran commanded, his voice carrying enough alpha authority to make the lesser wolves flinch. Marcus straightened, clearly steeling himself for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. The northern packs are demanding a formal trial of bloodline. They want proof that she is truly of royal nightshade descent, not some elaborate deception designed to manipulate the mate bond. The battle, Lyra started. Could have been staged, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp with accusation. Power can be borrowed, wolves can be trained to shift larger, and there are potions that can temporarily change eye colour. The Northern Alphas want something more substantial than a convenient awakening during a convenient attack. Kieran's growl was low and dangerous. "Are you questioning my mates?" "I'm questioning whether she's using you," Marcus snapped, his own wolf surfacing enough to add harmonics to his voice. "Whether this whole thing is an elaborate plot to steal the throne from its rightful heir." The rightful heir, Seraphina, of course. And who?" Lyra asked, her voice deceptively calm, despite the fury building in her chest. "Do you believe is the rightful heir to a bloodline that was declared extinct 60 years ago?" Marcus's smile was cold and calculating. Lady Seraphina has discovered some interesting information about her own ancestry. Apparently her great-grandmother was a nightshade cousin, making her the closest living relative to the royal line. Lies. The word blazed through Lyra's consciousness with absolute certainty. Her wolf could smell the deception rolling off Marcus in waves, could sense the desperation beneath his carefully constructed argument. "Convenient," she said, silver light beginning to flicker in her eyes. "And I suppose she has documentation to support these claims?" "She has evidence." Marcus pulled a scroll from his robes, the parchment old enough to look authentic to casual inspection. "A genealogy that traces her bloodline directly to the Nightshade royalty." Kieran moved to take the scroll, but Lyra's hand stopped him. Something about the document set her newly awakened senses, screaming warnings, dark magic clinging to it like smoke. "Don't touch it," she whispered, her voice urgent with alarm. "It's been cursed." Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment, surprise, and something that might have been fear, crossing his features before he regained control. "Cursed?" He laughed, but the sound was forced. "Your Majesty, surely you don't believe—" The document erupted into flames. Not ordinary fire, but silver flames that burned with the pure light of royal magic, consuming the false genealogy in seconds while leaving no ash behind. The cursed magic that had clung to it screamed as it died, a sound like breaking glass that made every wolf in the room flinch. "Forgery," Lyra said simply, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had touched the truth and found it wanting. "And blood magic. Someone tried very hard to make those lies look convincing." Marcus had gone pale, his carefully constructed composure cracking as his plan fell apart. "That proves nothing. You could have destroyed genuine evidence to protect your own deception." "Could I?" Lyra stepped forward, her power beginning to fill the room like visible heat. "Tell me, Beta Marcus, when did you start working with the Shadow Court?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Marcus stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked very much like guilt. "That's impossible," one of the other elders gasped. "Marcus would never—" "Wouldn't he?" Lyra's voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Tell me how the Shadow Court knew exactly where to find me. Tell me how they got through castle defences that should have been impenetrable. Tell me why the assassination attempt came just days after my awakening, when they should have needed weeks to organise such a coordinated attack." The silence that followed was deafening. "You've been feeding them information," Kieran said, his voice deadly quiet. "For how long?" Marcus's composure shattered completely. "You don't understand. The old bloodlines were extinct for a reason. That kind of power, that level of magic, it's too dangerous. The Shadow Court offered a different path, a way to keep the supernatural world stable without risking another magical war." "By murdering children," Lyra said, her silver eyes blazing with fury that made the very air around her crackle with energy. "By hunting down bloodlines and destroying families." "By preventing another catastrophe like the Blood Wars," Marcus shot back, his own desperation making him reckless. "Your parents nearly destroyed half the Northern Territories with their power. Do you think we wanted to risk that happening again?" The admission hung in the air like poison, confirming everything Lyra had suspected about the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. "So you made a deal with monsters," Kieran said, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that preceded executions. "You betrayed your own pack, your own people, to prevent a war that existed only in your imagination." "And now?" Lyra asked, taking another step forward. "Now that your allies have failed to kill me, what's the next phase of your plan?" Marcus's eyes flicked to the door, clearly calculating his chances of escape, but Kieran's power filled the space between them like a wall of solid authority. "The severing ritual," Marcus whispered, the words dragged from him by alpha command. "Seraphina found the incantations in the forbidden texts. If she can break your mate bond, if she can force it to redirect to her, then she becomes the rightful queen by supernatural law." Horror crashed over Lyra like a cold wave. Not just the loss of her connection to Kieran, but the violation of having her most sacred bond twisted into something unnatural, something wrong. "When?" Kieran's voice was barely human. "Tonight. The new moon provides the necessary darkness, and she has the blood sacrifice ready." Marcus's expression crumbled completely. "I'm sorry. I thought it was for the best. I thought the old ways were better." The new moon. Lyra looked toward the window, where the sky was already darkening toward full night. In a few hours, Seraphina would attempt to tear apart the most precious thing in her world and claim it for herself, over her dead body. "Guards!" Kieran called, his voice carrying through the castle like thunder. "Arrest Beta Marcus for treason and conspiracy with enemy forces." As the guards moved to restrain the broken man, Lyra felt her wolf stir with predatory anticipation. Seraphina wanted to play with forbidden magic, wanted to steal what belonged to another through blood and sacrifice. She was about to learn why the Nightshade bloodline had once been feared across the supernatural world. The hunt was about to begin. The ancient coronation chamber lay hidden beneath the castle's foundations, carved from living stone by the first wolves who had walked these lands. Lyra descended the spiralling stairs with Elder Morrigan at her side, each step taking her deeper into the heart of her ancestral power. "Your mother stood here once," Morrigan said softly, her voice echoing off walls that pulsed with their own inner light. "The night before she fled with your father, she came to claim the artifacts that were her birthright. She knew she might never return." Lyra's breath caught as they reached the bottom of the stairs. The chamber opened before them like a cathedral of stone and starlight, its domed ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move and dance in the candlelight. At the centre of the room stood a raised dais, and upon it 3 objects that made her wolf sing with recognition. A crown of silver and moonstone, its intricate metalwork depicting running wolves and crescent moons. A blade whose edge seemed to hold captured lightning, its hilt wrapped in leather that still carried the faint scent of her mother's hands. And most precious of all, a ceremonial collar of woven silver that pulsed with its own inner fire, the mate bond collar that had been worn by every Nightshade queen for 1,000 years. "The crown will only accept one of true royal blood," Morrigan explained, moving to the dais with reverent care. "If you are not what you claim to be, it will burn you to ash. If you are," she smiled, "if you are, it will awaken power that has slept for 60 years. Lyra approached the artifact slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything she had learned about herself, everything she had become, would be tested in the next few moments. Either she would emerge as the queen she was meant to be, or she would die in flames of her own pretension. She reached for the crown first. The moment her fingers touched the silver, power exploded through her like liquid lightning. Not pain this time, but recognition so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Every Nightshade Queen who had ever worn this crown was suddenly present in her mind. Their memories, their strength, their absolute certainty of purpose flowing into her consciousness like a river of molten gold. The crown settled on her head as if it had been made for her specifically, its weight both substantial and perfectly balanced. Silver light blazed from the moonstones, casting patterns on the chamber walls that looked like wolf shadows running through eternal forests. "My queen," Morrigan whispered, dropping to one knee. But Lyra was already reaching for the blade, her hand closing around the hilt with the familiarity of genetic memory. The weapon sang as she lifted it, its edge crackling with elemental power that responded to her will like an extension of her own body. Lightning danced along the steel, and when she moved it through the air, it left trails of silver fire that took long moments to fade. The mate bond collar was the final piece, and as she lifted it from its resting place, she could feel Kieran through their connection. He was somewhere above them, his wolf pacing with restless energy, sensing the power that was awakening in the depths of the castle. The collar settled around her throat like a promise, its silver links warming against her skin until they felt like part of her. The mate bond blazed brighter in response, golden threads of connection that now carried a depth of power that made her previous understanding seem like a pale shadow. "It is time," Morrigan said, her voice thick with emotion. "Time for the pack to see their true queen." They ascended through corridors that seemed different now, as if Lyra's acceptance by the ancient artifacts had fundamentally changed her relationship to the castle itself. Wolves they passed dropped to their knees instinctively, their submissions automatic and absolute in the face of royal power that had been awakened rather than assumed. The great hall had been prepared for a ceremony, but not the one Seraphina had planned. Word of Beta Marcus's arrest had spread through the pack like wildfire, and now every wolf of significance stood assembled, their faces curious and expectant, and touched with the first stirrings of genuine hope. Kieran waited at the far end of the hall, magnificent in formal robes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the authority of his bearing. When their eyes met across the distance, the mate bond flared so brightly that several wolves gasped at the visible manifestation of their connection. "My people," Lyra said, her voice carrying through the hall with supernatural clarity, "I stand before you not as the servant you once knew, but as the queen you have always needed." She began to walk down the centre aisle, the crowd parting before her like waves before the prow of a ship. The crown caught the candlelight and threw it back in patterns that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. "For 18 years I lived among you as less than nothing. I scrubbed your floors, tended your fires, and endured your contempt because a spell had hidden what I truly was." She paused, letting her power fill the space around her until every wolf in the hall could feel it pressing against their consciousness. "But spells can be broken. Truth will always find a way to surface, and tonight you will witness the return of a bloodline you thought lost forever." She reached the front of the hall where Kieran waited, his silver eyes blazing with pride and something deeper. Love. Absolute, unwavering love that had seen her through the transformation from nothing to everything. "Some of you still doubt," she continued, turning to face the assembled pack. "Some of you still believe this is deception, political theatre designed to steal power that belongs to another." Her gaze found Seraphina in the crowd, standing with her remaining supporters, her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. The false genealogy might have been destroyed, but the other woman's ambitions burned as bright as ever. "So I offer you proof," Lyra said, raising the lightning blade above her head. "Let any who question my bloodline step forward and face the judgment of the ancient powers." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and for a moment the hall was silent enough to hear heartbeats. Then Seraphina moved. "I accept your challenge," she declared, pushing through the crowd with her chin raised in defiant pride. "But not as a simple contest of power. I invoke the right of royal combat." Gasps echoed through the hall. The right of royal combat was an ancient law, older than the kingdoms themselves, that allowed any wolf of claimed royal blood to challenge another for supremacy. Victory meant not just acknowledgement of superiority, but the right to claim everything the defeated had possessed, including their mate. "Seraphina," Kieran's voice was deadly quiet, "you don't have royal blood." "Don't I?" Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "The genealogy might have been destroyed, but the blood ritual I performed yesterday confirms it. I have awakened the dormant nightshade power in my veins, power that gives me every right to challenge this pretender." She began to shift as she spoke, her human form dissolving into something larger and more dangerous than her usual golden wolf. This creature was touched with darkness, its fur streaked with shadow, and its eyes burning with unnatural red fire. Blood magic. She had used blood magic to artificially enhance her abilities, to give herself power that didn't rightfully belong to her. "So be it," Lyra said, feeling her own wolf surge to the surface with eager anticipation. "But understand this, Seraphina, when I defeat you, when I prove beyond any doubt that you are nothing but ambition and stolen magic, you will submit to my authority completely. No more challenges, no more plots, no more threats to what is mine." Seraphina's laugh was like breaking crystal. "When you lose, little pretender, you will watch as I claim your mate and your crown. The Shadow Court has allies you haven't even imagined, power you can't comprehend. This castle will burn before I let you keep what should be mine." The transformation took her fully then, her enhanced wolf form radiating dark power that made the very air around her shimmer with corruption. She was larger than she should have been, faster than natural law allowed, her claws dripping with poison that hissed where it touched the stone floor. Lyra shifted in response, her silver wolf emerging with fluid grace that made Seraphina's transformation look clumsy by comparison. Where her rival radiated corruption, she blazed with pure power, silver light cascading from her fur like captured starfire. They circled each other in the centre of the hall while the pack pressed back against the walls, giving them space for a battle that would determine the future of their world. "You cannot win," Seraphina snarled, her voice distorted by the dark magic that enhanced her form. "I have power you cannot match, allies you cannot defeat. Submit now, and I may let you live as my servant." "I have something you will never understand," Lyra replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the castle stones themselves seem to sing in response. "I have the love of my mate, the loyalty of my people, and the strength of a bloodline that has never known defeat." Seraphina attacked first, moving with inhuman speed toward Lyra's throat. But royal wolves were bred for battle, and Lyra met the charge with lightning reflexes that turned defense into offense in the space of a heartbeat. They clashed in the center of the hall, silver light meeting shadow fire, legitimate power facing stolen magic. And as they fought, as claws met fangs and fury matched fury, every wolf in the castle understood that they were witnessing something legendary. The battle for the soul of their pack had finally begun. The battle was a symphony of silver and shadow, legitimate power clashing against stolen magic in a dance as old as the supernatural world itself. Seraphina's enhanced wolf moved with inhuman speed, her claws raking across Lyra's ribs before dancing away from the retaliating strike. Blood magic had made her faster, stronger, deadlier than any natural wolf had a right to be, but it had also made her reckless, desperate. The corruption that enhanced her abilities whispered promises of victory while slowly eating away at her sanity. Lyra fought with the patience of royalty and the precision of a bloodline bred for war. Where Seraphina was fury and desperation, she was controlled power, every movement calculated to wear down her opponent while conserving her own strength. The lightning blade in her human form had become elemental claws in her wolf shape, each strike crackling with energy that left burning trails in the stone floor. "You cannot win," Seraphina snarled, circling for another attack. "I have allies, magic, power beyond anything your precious bloodline can offer." "Do you?" Lyra's voice carried harmonics that made the very air sing with royal authority. "Because from where I stand, you look very much alone." It was true. As the battle raged, the pack had begun to understand what they were witnessing. Not just a contest between rivals, but a confrontation between legitimate rule and usurped power. One by one, wolves who had supported Seraphina's claim began to step back, their instincts recognizing the fundamental wrongness of blood magic corruption. Seraphina's attack came like a hurricane, all claws and fangs and poisonous fury. She threw herself at Lyra with everything she had, determined to end the fight through overwhelming force. Her enhanced abilities made her strong enough to shatter stone, fast enough to blur between one moment and the next. But speed without strategy was just violence, and Lyra had learned strategy from genetic memories that stretched back 1,000 years. She moved like liquid silver, flowing around Seraphina's charge and striking at pressure points that would have been impossible to hit without supernatural precision. Her claws found the gaps in her opponent's defences, opening wounds that bled shadow instead of blood, marking where the corruption had taken deepest hold. "Impossible," Seraphina gasped, staggering as one of Lyra's strikes severed tendons in her rear leg. "The ritual was perfect. The power should be absolute." "Stolen power always fails," Lyra replied, pressing her advantage with strikes that came faster than thought. "Blood magic can enhance what exists, but it cannot create what was never there. You were never royal, Seraphina. You were never worthy, and now your own corruption is consuming you from within." It was true. As the battle continued, the dark magic that enhanced Seraphina's form was beginning to exact its price. Her fur was falling out in patches, revealing skin that looked burned and scarred. Her movements were becoming erratic as the poison she had consumed to gain power began to destroy her from the inside out. But cornered animals were dangerous, and as Seraphina realized she was losing, her attacks became more vicious, more desperate. She stopped fighting like a wolf and began fighting like something rabid, her claws seeking not victory, but mutual destruction. One of her wild swipes caught Lyra across the muzzle, opening a gash that sent silver blood spattering across the stone floor. The pack gasped as their new queen staggered, and for a moment Seraphina's laugh echoed through the hall like breaking glass. "First blood to me!" she snarled, preparing for a killing strike. But as Lyra's blood hit the ancient stones of the great hall, something extraordinary happened. The floor began to glow with silver light, ancient runes carved into the very foundations blazing to life as they recognized the blood of the true royal line. The castle itself was awakening. Power flooded through the stones, through the air, through every wolf present as the ancient magic that had built this place recognized its rightful mistress. The walls sang with harmonics that spoke of loyalty and protection, of a fortress built to defend the Nightshade bloodline and all who served them faithfully. Seraphina's next attack never landed. The floor beneath her feet erupted with silver light, ancient wards responding to royal blood by striking down any who would harm the true queen. She was thrown backward with bone-crushing force, her enhanced form slamming into the far wall hard enough to crack the stone. When she tried to rise, when she tried to continue the fight, the castle's own defences held her pinned. Stone hands emerged from the floor to grasp her limbs, preventing any movement that might threaten the woman whose blood had awakened protections that had slept for 60 years. "This is impossible," Seraphina whispered, her voice broken with pain and disbelief. "The ritual should have made me queen. The blood magic should have given me everything." "Blood magic," said a new voice from the entrance to the great hall, "always comes with a price." Every wolf in the hall turned to see figures in dark robes filing through the doorway, their faces hidden behind masks that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Shadow Court had arrived, drawn by the massive expenditure of corrupted power that had enhanced their pawn's abilities. But they weren't here to rescue Seraphina. They were here to collect. "The contract is complete," the lead figure announced, his voice like grinding stone. "Lady Seraphina has served her purpose in forcing the awakening of the true bloodline. Now we claim what was promised." "What contract?" Kieran demanded, his wolf surfacing as he moved to place himself between the intruders and his mate. The Shadow Court leader's laugh was like breaking bones. "Did you truly think we cared about one ambitious woman's petty desires? She was never more than a tool to flush the hidden princess from her sanctuary. Now that the Nightshade power has fully awakened, now that the bloodline has revealed itself completely, we can finally finish what we started 60 years ago." Horror dawned on Seraphina's face as she realized the truth. The alliance she thought she had forged, the power she thought she had claimed, the support she believed she could count on, all of it had been manipulation. She had never been their ally. She had been their bait. "You used me," she whispered, her enhanced form beginning to collapse as the blood magic reached its inevitable conclusion. "Of course we used you," the leader replied with casual cruelty. "Just as we used your father, just as we used everyone who thought they could bargain with forces beyond their understanding. The only thing we have ever wanted is the complete extinction of the Nightshade line." They began to spread out through the hall, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of careful planning and overwhelming force. These weren't the desperate assassins who had attacked days earlier. These were the Shadow Court's elite, enhanced with centuries of accumulated dark magic and armed with weapons that seemed to drink light from the air around them. "But you made a mistake," Lyra said, rising from where the castle's magic had been healing her wounds. The silver light around her intensified, royal power blazing with an intensity that made several of the Shadow Court warriors step backward. "You assumed I would be like my parents, isolated, alone, fighting only to protect what I loved." She looked around the great hall, at the wolves who had once dismissed her as nothing but who now stood ready to defend their queen with their lives. At Kieran, whose love had given her strength when she had none. At Elder Morrigan, whose wisdom had guided her awakening. At guards and servants and common pack members who had found in her something worth believing in. "But I'm not alone," she continued, her voice carrying through the hall with supernatural clarity. "I am not isolated. I am not fighting just to protect what I love. I am fighting to protect what loves me in return." The mate bond blazed between her and Kieran, golden light that connected not just two hearts, but two souls, two destinies that had found completion in each other. But more than that, she could feel the bonds of loyalty and affection that connected her to every wolf in the hall, the pack bonds that made them family rather than just subjects. "Attack!" the Shadow Court leader commanded. They moved like nightmare-made flesh, faster than mortal perception, their weapons trailing darkness that seemed to devour the very air. They had come prepared for a desperate princess, fighting alone, as her parents had fought. Instead, they found a queen surrounded by her people, a bloodline awakened not just to its own power, but to the strength that came from being loved and choosing to love in return. Lyra met the first attacker with claws that crackled with lightning, her enhanced strength allowing her to tear through magical armour as if it were paper. But she wasn't fighting alone. Kieran's massive black wolf was at her side, his own supernatural strength turning Shadow Court warriors into broken shadows. Pack wolves flanked them, their coordinated attacks overwhelming enemies who had expected to face a single target. The battle that followed was brutal and brief. The Shadow Court had prepared for many possibilities, but they had not prepared for the awakening of ancient castle defences or the fury of an entire pack defending their chosen queen. One by one, their elite warriors fell to combined attacks that turned their careful strategy into desperate retreat. The last Shadow Court assassin died beneath Lyra's claws, dissolving into shadow and ash like all his kind. As silence fell over the great hall, broken only by the heavy breathing of exhausted warriors, she realized that it was finally over. The enemies who had haunted her family for generations were dead. The woman who had tormented her for years lay broken by her own corrupted ambitions. And she stood victorious, surrounded by people who had chosen her not because of her bloodline, but because of who she had proven herself to be. "My queen," Elder Morrigan said, her voice thick with emotion and pride. Around the hall, every surviving wolf dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in acknowledgement and respect, and something deeper than either: love. They loved their queen, and she loved them in return, and that mutual affection was stronger than any magic the Shadow Court had ever wielded. Lyra looked down at Seraphina, who lay unconscious and broken, the blood magic finally consuming what remained of her enhanced form. She felt no satisfaction in her rival's defeat, only sadness for a woman who had destroyed herself in pursuit of something that was never meant to be hers. "She will live," Lyra declared, her voice carrying royal authority that no one would dare to question. "She will face trial for her crimes, but she will live. I will not begin my reign with unnecessary death." Mercy. Even for those who had tried to destroy her, she would choose mercy when mercy was possible. This was what it meant to be a true queen. The sacred grove had been prepared for a ceremony that would have been impossible to imagine just a week ago. Ancient trees that had witnessed 1,000 years of nightshade history formed a natural cathedral, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that filtered moonlight into patterns of silver and shadow. At the centre of the grove, on ground that had been blessed by generations of royal matings, stood an altar carved from living stone that pulsed with its own inner light. Lyra moved through the assembled pack with regal grace, no longer the invisible servant who had scrubbed floors and endured contempt, but a queen whose very presence commanded respect and love in equal measure. The crown of her ancestors caught the moonlight, casting patterns of light that seemed to dance with purpose, while the mate bond collar around her throat blazed with golden fire that spoke of destiny finally fulfilled. She wore silk the colour of starlight, a gown that had belonged to her mother and had been carefully preserved by Elder Morrigan through 60 years of waiting. The fabric flowed around her like liquid silver, and with each step the royal marks on her skin glowed brighter, proclaiming her bloodline to any who might still doubt. But there were no doubters left. The battle against the Shadow Court had burned away the last vestiges of disbelief, leaving only a pack united in their love for the Queen, who had proven herself worthy through courage, mercy, and the strength to protect those who could not protect themselves. Kieran waited for her at the altar, magnificent in formal robes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the authority that radiated from him like heat from a forge. When their eyes met across the sacred space, the mate bond flared so brightly that several pack members gasped at the visible manifestation of their connection. "My people," Elder Morrigan's voice carried through the grove with centuries of accumulated wisdom. "We gather tonight not just to witness a mating ceremony, but to celebrate the return of hope itself." The words resonated through the assembled wolves, pack members who had lived their entire lives believing the royal bloodline was extinct, that the ancient magic was lost forever. Now they stood in the presence of their true queen, watching as she claimed not just her throne, but her destined mate. "Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn," Morrigan continued, "do you come before this gathering of your own free will, acknowledging that the woman who approaches you is your true mate, chosen by forces beyond mortal understanding? I do. His voice carried through the grove with absolute certainty. She is my mate, my queen, my everything. There is nothing in this world I would not sacrifice to keep her, no enemy I would not face to protect her, no force that could make me love her less than I do in this moment. Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes as his words washed over her. A week ago she had been nothing, nobody, invisible to everyone who mattered. Now the most powerful man in their world was declaring his love before witnesses, claiming her with a passion that made her wolf purr with satisfaction. Luna Lyra Nightshade, Morrigan turned to her, do you come before this gathering of your own free will, acknowledging that this man is your true mate, the other half of your soul? I do. Her voice was steady, despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. He saw me when I was invisible, loved me when I believed myself worthless, and stood by me as I discovered the truth of what I was meant to be. He is my mate, my king, my forever. The formal words were tradition, but the emotions behind them were entirely personal. This ceremony wasn't just about political alliances or supernatural bonds. It was about two people who had found completion in each other despite impossible odds. Then let the ancient ritual begin, Morrigan declared, raising her hands to the star-filled sky. What followed was magic older than kingdoms, more fundamental than politics. Kieran extended his hand toward Lyra, and when she placed hers in his, power flowed between them like lightning seeking earth. The mate bond that had connected them from their first meeting blazed brighter, stronger, more complete than either had thought possible. With this joining, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion, I claim you as mine in all ways, for all time, before all witnesses. My wolf recognizes yours, my soul calls to yours, my heart beats in rhythm with yours. With this joining, Lyra responded, feeling the ancient words rise from genetic memory. I claim you as mine in all ways, for all time, before all witnesses. My wolf recognizes yours, my soul calls to yours, my heart beats in rhythm with yours. The vows were sealed with a kiss that sent shockwaves of power radiating outward from the altar. Every wolf in the grove felt it, the completion of a bond that had been building since the moment their eyes first met. Light blazed between them, silver and gold intertwining in patterns that spoke of destinies fulfilled and ancient magic awakened. When they broke apart, when the light faded to a warm glow that would never entirely disappear, they were no longer two separate beings who happened to love each other. They were mated, bonded at levels deeper than physical, their very souls intertwined in ways that could never be undone. I present to you, Elder Morrigan announced, her voice thick with joy and pride, Alpha King Kieran Blackthorn and Lunar Queen Lyra Nightshade, true mates joined by bonds that cannot be broken, rulers chosen by fate itself. The pack's response was immediate and thunderous. Howls rose to the star-filled sky, voices lifted in harmony that spoke of acceptance and celebration, and hope for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. They had their king and queen, their true leaders, their family made complete. But even as the celebration swirled around them, Lyra and Kieran only had eyes for each other. The political implications could wait, the queenly duties could be delayed for one night. Tonight was about them, about the love that had survived every obstacle and emerged stronger than ever. My queen, Kieran whispered against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with supernatural bonds and everything to do with simple, overwhelming desire. My king, she replied, her hands fisting in the fabric of his robes as she pulled him closer. The pack gave them space as they moved away from the altar toward the private chamber that had been prepared for them, a pavilion of silk and moonlight where they could complete their bonding in the intimacy it deserved. But even their retreat was a celebration. pack members throwing flower petals and calling out blessings as their rulers passed. Inside the pavilion, surrounded by candles that cast dancing shadows on walls of flowing silk, they came together not as queen and king, but as woman and man, as two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds. "I love you," Kieran said, his hands cradling her face with infinite gentleness. "I loved you when you were invisible. I love you now that you're revealed, and I will love you for every day of forever." "I love you too," she whispered, her own hands tracing the strong lines of his jaw, memorizing features that would be dear to her until the end of time. "You made me real, Kieran. You saw me when no one else could, loved me when I couldn't love myself." What followed was passion and tenderness combined, the physical completion of a bond that had been growing stronger since their first meeting. They came together as equals, as partners, as two halves of a whole that had finally been made complete. The mate bond sang between them as they moved together, golden light that connected not just their hearts but their very souls. Every touch was magnified, every caress shared across the supernatural connection that made them more than the sum of their parts. When completion finally claimed them, when they collapsed together in trembling exhaustion and overwhelming satisfaction, the mate bond settled into something deeper than passion. Peace. Absolute, perfect peace that came from being exactly where they belonged, with exactly who they were meant to be with. "We did it," Lyra whispered against his chest, her voice soft with wonder. "We're actually here, actually together." "Did you doubt?" Kieran's arms tightened around her, holding her close as their breathing slowly returned to normal. "Every day," she admitted, "every moment. A part of me kept waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake, that I was dreaming, that girls like me don't get endings like this." "Girls like you," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "deserve endings exactly like this. You deserve to be loved, cherished, protected and celebrated. You deserve to be queen not just because of your bloodline, but because of who you are. Because of your strength, your compassion, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for others." She tilted her head up to look at him, seeing her own contentment reflected in his silver eyes. "And what do kings like you deserve?" "A queen who challenges me, completes me, and makes me better than I ever thought I could be." His smile was soft and utterly content. "A queen exactly like you." Outside the pavilion, the pack's celebration continued, their voices raised in songs that spoke of new beginnings and hope fulfilled. But inside their private sanctuary, the king and queen of the Northern Territories held each other close and marvelled at the miracle of a love that had overcome every obstacle to find its perfect expression. They were no longer the servant and the king who had met by impossible chance. They were mates, partners, equals, who had chosen each other not just once, but again and again through every trial. They were home.